The prosecution has finished making its closing arguments in the trial of President Trump's former campaign chairman. Paul Manafort's legal team rested their case yesterday in his fraud trial without calling a single witness to the stand. Manafort's attorney says his client supports that decision.
He did so because he and his legal team believe that the government has not met its burden of proof.
Well, the government says that Manafort hid at least $16 million in income from the IRS between 2010 and 2014. He allegedly disguised the money as loans, and then he hid it in foreign banks. Well, this case is the first to stem from special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. It involves work the Manafort did for pro-Russian political groups. However, it is not directly related to allegations of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. CBS News Washington correspondent Paula Reid is outside the courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia, and joins us now. So, Paula, give us a sense. What was really the main takeaway from the prosecution's closing argument?
The prosecution told the jury it's not complicated, that Manafort is a liar. They said, look, when he was earning tens of millions of dollars from his political work overseas, he lied. He hid that money from you, taxpayers, the jury. But then when all the money dried up, he then lied to you and stole money from banks by forging loan documents. They said it's pretty simple, that he is a liar. And they went through their case sort of from the start to the finish. They've heard from 27 different witnesses. They went through key pieces of evidence that they say are irrefutable. And of course, one of the most complicated witnesses they had was Manafort's former co-defendant and former business associate, Richard Gates. The prosecution said, look, you don't have to like Richard Gates as a person. Yes, he had an extramarital affair. Yes, he embezzled from Mr. Manafort. But the fact is that his testimony matches the documents that we have presented. I mean, at one point, the prosecutor even joked. He said, look, if the defense's whole strategy is that Gates was secretly hiding tens of millions of dollars from Manafort and then depositing it in Manafort's bank accounts without him knowing, we should all be so lucky.
Yeah, it was fascinating to hear the defense talk about his hands being in the cookie jar and then also seeing the prosecution there, as you mentioned. You know, the jury has had weeks worth of testimony and evidence. Is there some sort of sense, Paul, as how long their deliberations at this point could take?
Marina, I've covered enough trials to know you never know how long it will take a jury to decide a case. There are 18 counts. As a recovering lawyer, I can tell you that the evidence is substantial. For some counts, the evidence is overwhelming. It likely won't result in a lot of debate, but you never know. There could be one juror who is concerned about some of the charges. There could be a juror who has other reasons or other questions about the evidence, and it could take longer. I don't know if the jury will actually get the case today. We still have to hear from the other side. We have to hear from the defense attorneys. The judge has to give instructions, which sounds simple, but it actually takes about 90 minutes. There are close to 100 different instructions he has to give them, and then they get the case. So that may not even happen before close of business today. But I think it's reasonable that we should be on alert tomorrow, expecting a verdict from the jury.
Oh, fascinating to hear you say 90 minutes, just rules and what the jury should need to know. Yeah. Give us a sense, though, Paula, what's really at stake for Manafort at this trial? How much prison time could he really be facing?
Manafort could face the rest of his life in prison, and this is just the first of two trials for Mr. Manafort. He faces a separate trial, a separate prosecution by the special counsel in September in Washington, D.C. It was his attorneys who argued not to consolidate these cases. But as we know, sources have told me, sources close to this case say he chose not to cooperate with the special counsel and to fight not one but two cases because he is banking on a presidential pardon. So I think that's important to remember as you look at how his defense is behaving in this case. The fact they didn't call any witnesses, the fact that they came out and stood just over my shoulder here yesterday and delivered a public statement saying, look, the government hasn't even made a case. They are really playing to a jury of one here because it is likely that Mr. Manafort will be convicted, and ultimately it will be up to the president to decide whether or not to pardon him so he doesn't have to spend the rest of his life in prison.
Paula Reid outside the courthouse for us. We'll be checking in with you later, Paula, just as soon as the defense wraps up their closing arguments. Thanks again, Paula.